You already think you know the answer. They call him the greatest of all time. 6 for 6, the standard every player since has been measured against. But here's the uncomfortable question nobody asks. Do you actually know it, or were you just told it? Because there's a difference between a legend you accept and a case you can defend. And over the next few hours, we're not going to accept anything. We're going to do something almost nobody does with Michael Jordan. We're going to put him on trial, season by season, number by number, every single year of his career. From a skinny rookie on a dead franchise to a 40-year-old willing his body up and down the floor in a Wizards jersey. We're going to bring the skeptics into the room and give them the mic. By the end, you'll have an answer you actually earned, not the one you were handed. Before we start, this is Game is Culture, and this is the kind of breakdown we do. The long, honest look at the things everybody talks about and almost nobody actually examines. If that's your lane, hit subscribe right now and turn the bell on. This series lives and dies on people who want the real conversation, not the recycled one. Subscribe, settle in, and let's build the case from the ground up. So let's go back to the beginning. Before the rings, before the myth. Back to the part of the story the highlight reels skip, because the part they skip is where the real argument lives. Here's the thing about the pre-championship Jordan years. This is where the skeptics actually have a point. For 6 seasons, Michael Jordan was the most electrifying scorer the sport had ever seen, and he won nothing. No rings, barely any playoff series. So we're going to start there, not where he's comfortable, where he's vulnerable. Start with the draft, because the draft is the first myth puncture. In June of 1984, Michael Jordan was not the consensus best player available. He went third. 2 Hall of Fame caliber talents on the board, and a generational guard sitting there, and a franchise looked at him and said, "We need size more." Remember that, because the Jordan was obviously the chosen one from day one narrative starts cracking before he's even played a game. 2 NBA front offices looked at Michael Jordan and passed. Then he got to Chicago, and Chicago was a graveyard. The Bulls before Jordan were a non-entity. Bad team, empty building, a franchise the league barely thought about. And a rookie walks in and immediately averages 28 points a game on better than 51% shooting. Look at that number for a second. 51%. As a guard, as a rookie, as the entire offense. That's not a chucker padding number. That's efficiency on enormous volume, which is the hardest combination to pull off in basketball. The more shots you take, the harder each one usually gets. Jordan took a ton and still hit better than half. He made the All-Star team and immediately walked into the first piece of Jordan folk, the so-called freeze-out. Veteran All-Stars supposedly refusing to pass him the ball because the rookie's hype had gotten too big too fast. Whether it was real or exaggerated, the meaning is the same. The league noticed him instantly, and not everyone was happy about it. And the bottom line that matters, the Bulls went from irrelevant to the playoffs. 38 wins, a first-round series. Here's our first question, and we're going to come back to it all film. How much does one player move a bad team's floor? Hold that. We'll keep testing it. Year 2 should have been the leap. Instead, it almost ended before it started. 3 games into the season, Jordan broke a bone in his left foot. He'd played just 18 games all year. The front office wanted to shut him down completely to protect the asset and, frankly, to protect their draft position. Jordan fought them to come back. There's a famous moment where he basically tells management he doesn't care about the standings, he wants to compete. That tension, the player who will not be managed, who treats losing on purpose as an insult, that's a character note that explains everything that comes later. And then in the first round, against the Boston Celtics, Bird and McHale and Parrish in their prime, he did this. 63 points, in the Boston Garden, in double overtime, against the champs, as a 23-year-old 2 months removed from a broken foot. It is still, to this day, decades later, the most points anyone has ever scored in a single playoff game in NBA history. Larry Bird walked off the floor and said, "That was God disguised as Michael Jordan." The Bulls lost. Boston swept them, 3 games to none. 63 points, the greatest individual playoff performance ever, and his team went home. So let's set the rule right now, out loud. Peak scoring output is not the same as winning leverage. You can pour in 63 and lose. We are going to spend this entire film figuring out the difference between scoring and winning, and 1986 is the cleanest example of the gap. Remember it, because the skeptics are going to lean on it hard in a minute. This next season is when the empty stats argument was born, and the season we have to take it most serious. Healthy for a full year for the first time, Jordan didn't just lead the league in scoring, he detonated. 37 points a game, 3,041 total points on the season, making him only the second player in NBA history after Wilt Chamberlain to crack 3,000 in a single year. It was, statistically, one of the greatest individual scoring seasons the sport has ever recorded. And here's the prosecution standing up. The Bulls finished 40-42, a losing record, and they got swept out of the first round by Boston again. 3-0 again. So the skeptic says, what is all this scoring for? 37 a night, and you can't get out of the first round. You're a one-man highlight machine on a losing team. That's not greatness, that's a stat sheet stuffer with no idea how to make a team better. We're not going to wave that away, we're going to sit in it, because that argument is the wall Michael Jordan had to climb, and the climb is the most interesting part of his whole career. The question now hanging in the air is, can the greatest scorer alive learn to win? Hold that. The next season is where the entire story turns. But before we move on, a piece of context the skeptics never give him. Jordan put up these numbers in an era that did not reward volume scoring the way the modern game does. There was no analytics-driven three-point revolution inflating point totals. The three-pointer existed, but it was a novelty, a desperation shot, not the engine of an offense. Jordan was scoring 37 a night, mostly from inside the arc and at the rim, against defenses that were allowed to hand check, body check, and grab him on every single possession. We'll build out the era argument in full later, but plant the flag now. These were not cheap points. They were the hardest kind. If this film has one hinge, it's this next season. So I'm going to slow all the way down here. In '88, Michael Jordan did something only one perimeter player in NBA history has ever done. He won Most Valuable Player and Defensive Player of the Year in the same season. Sit with how rare that is. The Defensive Player of the Year award has existed for decades and gone almost entirely to big men. Rim protectors, anchors. A guard winning it at all is exceptional. A guard winning it while also being named the single most valuable player in the entire league is a category of one, and he didn't sacrifice the offense to do it. He still led the league in scoring at 35 a game. He also led the entire NBA in steals. This is the answer to the empty stats argument, and it's the moment the player changes shape. Up to now, the case against him was, he's a scorer who can't make his team better. In this season, he becomes a two-way force, the guy guarding the other team's best player, generating turnovers, and then dropping 35. You cannot call that empty. That's a player bending the entire game to his will on both ends. He capped it by winning the All-Star Game MVP in his home arena in Chicago and taking the slam dunk contest with that iconic free throw line takeoff. For one weekend, he was the showman and the substance. And quietly, the wins started to follow. 50 wins on the season, the first playoff series victory of his career over Cleveland. And then he ran into the team that would define the next 2 years of his life. A team built on purpose to break him. Two things make the next season essential. One is iconic, one is forgotten. Both matter for the case. Start with the forgotten one, because the analytics crowd loves it. Late in this season, the Bulls coaching staff did something almost unthinkable with the best scorer alive. They moved him to point guard, made him the primary playmaker. And Jordan responded by nearly averaging a triple-double over the stretch run. Better than 30 points, 8 rebounds, and 8 assists a game on the year. With a run of triple-doubles down the home stretch, that's one of the great playmaking stretches in league history. That's the rebuttal to anyone who says he was only a scorer who didn't make teammates better. When the team asked him to run the offense and set everyone up, he did exactly that. At an elite level, the ability was always there. The system hadn't caught up to it yet. Now the iconic one. First round against Cleveland. Game 5. Series tied. 3 seconds left. Bulls down 1. The inbound. The catch at the elbow. Craig Alo draped all over him. And then, the shot. Over Alo at the buzzer to win the series on the road. The hang. The release. The fist pump. This is the moment the clutch legend goes from anecdote to canon. We're going to audit that clutch reputation later, properly, with the actual late game numbers. But emotionally, this is where it's born. The Bulls rode it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, and there, the wall. To understand what Jordan became, you have to understand what was stopping him. And the Detroit Pistons are the control group of his entire career. They were the variable that proved talent alone wasn't enough. The Pistons, the bad boys, built a literal scheme around one man. They called it the Jordan rules. The concept, never let him beat you one-on-one. And the second he drives, send a second and third defender to put him on the floor, hard, make him a passer, make him take a beating, make him do it again the next night. And for 2 years, it worked. Individually, Jordan was untouchable. He won the scoring title again. He dropped 69 points in a single game against Cleveland, a career high. The Bulls won 55 games and became a genuine title contender. And in the Eastern Conference Finals, it came down to a Game 7, and Detroit broke them again. This is rock bottom dressed up as success. 55 wins, the best individual basketball on earth. And a third straight year of being physically, strategically dismantled by the same team. The skeptic's case is at its absolute peak right here. The greatest scorer alive, 6 seasons in, 0 finals appearances, repeatedly solved by a smarter, tougher team. And here's what makes Jordan Jordan. He went to the weight room. He famously bulked up to absorb the punishment, the workouts that became known as the Breakfast Club. He stopped trying to out-finesse the Pistons and started preparing to outlast them. The wall didn't break him. It redesigned him. Everything up to this point was the climb. Now, the summit. Here's the honest heart of what comes next, and we're going to stay honest about it the whole way. When the Bulls finally broke through, Jordan was not the only thing that changed. The skeptics have a real argument here, and the strongest version of the Jordan case is the one that answers it head-on, instead of pretending it doesn't exist. So as we walk through the first three-peat, keep one question running. Was this Jordan getting better, or the machine around him finally catching up? The truthful answer is both. And the interplay is the whole story. 3 things came together in that first championship year, and you have to credit all 3, or the analysis is dishonest. First, Phil Jackson and the triangle offense. Phil had taken over as head coach, and his staff installed a system that did something crucial. It stopped the offense from being only Jordan isolating against a stacked defense. The triangle created space, ball movement, and reads, which meant the Jordan rules suddenly had a counter. Double Michael, and the system found the open man. Second, Pippen leapt into stardom. This is the single most important supporting variable in the entire Jordan story, so we'll keep returning to it. Pippen became a genuine co-star, a point forward who could initiate offense, and, critically, an elite enough defender that the Bulls could finally match Detroit's physicality. Pippen is the answer to Jordan never had help, and we're not going to pretend otherwise. He had historically great help. Third, Jordan himself accepted the system. This is the part that gets lost. The hardest thing for a 35-point scorer to do is trust an offense that takes the ball out of his hands. He bought in. That's a basketball IQ point the highlight reels never show. In the Eastern Conference Finals, the Bulls faced the Pistons for the 4th time, and they swept them, 4-0. They didn't just beat the wall, they demolished it. A clean sweep of the team that had tormented them for 3 years. The Pistons, sore losers to the end, walked off the court with time still on the clock, refusing to shake hands. That's 3 years of being beaten, finally paid back in full. Then, the finals. Chicago against the Los Angeles Lakers. Jordan against Magic Johnson, the torch passing on national television. He beat Magic, the face of the previous era, 4-1, for his first ring, his first finals MVP, on top of the regular season MVP. And then, the image that ends this chapter. Jordan in the locker room, clutching the championship trophy, crying. 6 years of being told he couldn't win. The dam breaks. That's not just a sports moment. That's the emotional turn of the whole story. Let it sit. If you ask the advanced metrics community, when Jordan was at his absolute statistical peak, a lot of them point right at the next season. 67 wins, back-to-back MVP, a team operating like a machine, and in the finals against Portland, the single most arrogant, untouchable performance of his career. 35 points in the first half of Game 1, 6 3-pointers, and after the 6th, he turns to the broadcast table and shrugs, as if even he can't explain it. The shrug is the perfect symbol of peak Jordan, so far beyond the competition that dominance had become almost a joke to him. The Bulls beat Portland in 6, second straight finals MVP. The third title is where the winning argument finally overwhelms the empty stats argument for good, but it's also where the human cost arrives. On the floor, this was a coronation. Jordan won his 7th straight scoring title, a streak that ties Wilt Chamberlain's record for consecutive scoring crowns. In the finals, against Charles Barkley's Phoenix Suns, and Barkley had just won the regular season MVP, so this was framed as a real challenge to Jordan's throne. 41 points a game across the entire series, the highest scoring average in any finals series ever. The Bulls closed it out in 6, sealed by John Paxson's 3 in Game 6, a perfect illustration of the system. The defense collapses on Jordan, the ball finds the open man, championship. Third ring, third straight finals MVP, the first player ever to win 3 finals MVPs in a row. And then, the part you cannot skip and cannot rush, and in the fall of 1993, at the absolute height of his powers, 3 rings, the best player on the planet, nothing left to prove, Michael Jordan walked away from basketball. The greatest player alive quit at his peak, and that decision sets up the strangest, most revealing chapter of the entire story. A chapter most highlight reels treat as a footnote, but which is actually one of the most important natural experiments in NBA history. Because the question everyone was about to find out the answer to was the exact one we've been circling this whole time. How much of this dynasty was the machine, and how much was the man? Just how good was Michael Jordan, really? So Michael Jordan walked away. 3 rings, the best player alive, and he quit. The basketball world was stunned. And what happened next is, for our purposes, the single most useful thing that ever happened in his career, because it ran the one experiment you can never normally run. You can't take the best player off a championship team and see what's left. Teams don't do that on purpose, but Jordan did it for us. He left, and the Bulls kept playing. So now we get a real answer to the question that's been haunting this whole story. How much of the dynasty was the machine, and how much was the man? Here's what the Bulls did without Michael Jordan. They won 55 games. Sit with that. The supporting cast, Scottie Pippen leading the way, the triangle still humming, Phil Jackson still coaching, lost the greatest scorer in NBA history, and dropped exactly 2 wins off the previous season's pace. Pippen had a monster year. He finished 3rd in MVP voting. He won the All-Star Game MVP. He carried that team like a genuine superstar, because that's what he was. And this cuts both ways, so we're going to be honest about both. The skeptic looks at 55 wins without Jordan and says, see, that was a stacked roster. Jordan was the cherry on top of a championship caliber team. The defender looks at the same 55 wins and says, and yet, with all that talent, they couldn't finish the job, 'cause they couldn't. In the second round, the Bulls ran into the New York Knicks, and it went to a Game 7, and they lost. There was a famous, brutal moment in Game 5, a foul called on Pippen in the final second. A call most people who watched it think was wrong, that swung the game to New York. The Bulls without Jordan were a coin flip away from the conference finals, and the coin came up the other way. So bank both truths. The cast was good enough to win 55 games. The cast was not good enough to win a title. The gap between those two things, that's roughly the size of Michael Jordan. Keep that measurement. We're going to use it at the end. Meanwhile, where was Jordan? He was in Birmingham, Alabama, playing minor league baseball, and people forget how real this was. He wasn't doing a publicity stunt. He was riding buses in the minors, taking batting practice for hours, grinding at a sport he hadn't played seriously since high school, in front of crowds who came just to see him. He hit around 200, which for a 31-year-old who'd skipped a decade of the sport to become the most famous basketball player on earth is honestly a testament to the competitor. He was outworking everyone and still failing. And he stuck with it anyway, because the one thing Jordan could not stand was being told there was something he couldn't do. But basketball was still in him. And in March of 1995, he sent the most famous two-word press release in sports history. "I'm back." He came back wearing number 45, not his old 20. And you could see the rust. He'd been away nearly 2 years. But even rusty, even mid-season, even on a body that had spent 18 months swinging a bat instead of shooting jumpers, look what he was still capable of. 5 games into his comeback, at Madison Square Garden, the biggest stage in the sport, the place that loves to crown and bury stars, Jordan dropped 55 points on the Knicks. They call it the double nickel, 2 years off, and on basketball's most famous floor, he scored 55. That's the thing about even a diminished Jordan. But this is where the honesty earns its keep, because the comeback did not end in glory. The Bulls reached the second round and ran into the future. A young, explosive Orlando Magic team built around Shaquille O'Neal and Penny Hardaway, and they beat him. In the very first game of the series, a young Nick Anderson stripped the ball from Jordan in the final seconds to swing the game, and afterward he said the line that stung. Number 45, he said, didn't explode like number 23. Jordan switched back to 23 mid-series. It didn't matter. Orlando won the series. For the first time, you could see the edges of mortality on him. The timing slightly off, the legs not quite there. A hungrier young team taking what used to be automatically his. And that loss is the most important thing that ever happened to the back half of his career. Because Michael Jordan walked out of that series furious. At the league, at the upstarts, and mostly at himself. He spent the entire offseason rebuilding his body and his game. And what came out the other side wasn't the high-flying scorer of the 80s anymore. It was something more dangerous. A more complete, more efficient, more ruthless version that would not lose again. The next season is, by a lot of measures, the greatest single-team season in the history of the NBA. Best rebounder and one of the best defenders alive. A chaos agent who plugged the one hole the roster had. Alongside Pippen, with shooters like Steve Kerr and the versatile Tony Kukoc and Ron Harper, the triangle now had everything. And they did something no team had ever done. They won 72 games, 72-10, a record that would stand for 2 decades. Jordan led the league in scoring again, his 8th scoring title, and he completed the rarest sweep in basketball. He won the regular season MVP, the All-Star Game MVP, and the Finals MVP all in the same year. 3 MVP trophies in a single season, almost no one has ever done it. They beat the Seattle Supersonics in the finals to cap it. But the moment that defines this season isn't a stat. It's the floor of the United Center after the final buzzer, because the title clincher fell on Father's Day, the first championship since his father was murdered. And Jordan, the most controlled, most ruthless competitor the sport has ever produced, collapsed on the floor, clutching the game ball, sobbing, unable to get up. Everything he'd buried during the baseball years, the grief he'd channeled into 72 wins, came pouring out at once. That image is the answer to anyone who thinks the legend is all cold-blooded marketing. That's a son who lost his father, came back from the dead, and won it for him. The next year, the machine kept rolling. 69 wins. Another scoring title. The only thing he didn't win was the regular season MVP, which went to Karl Malone, and Jordan characteristically treated that as a personal insult to be settled later. But this season gave us one of the most famous performances in basketball history, and one of the most argued over. The finals went to the Utah Jazz, Malone and John Stockton, a genuinely great team, the pick and roll perfected. The series was tied, and Game 5 would essentially decide it. And the night before, Jordan got violently ill, sick enough that the people around him weren't sure he'd play. He couldn't keep food down. He was dehydrated, drained, barely able to stand. They call it the flu game, and he went out and scored 38 points. There's an image at the end, Jordan completely spent, collapsing into Pippen's arms as they walk off the floor, because he literally has nothing left in his body. He'd emptied the tank and won the most important game of the series while sick enough to be in a hospital bed. The Bulls closed it out in 6, the clincher won, fittingly for this era, by a Steve Kerr jump shot off a Jordan pass, because even now, the system was still the thing. 5th ring, 5th finals MVP, and then the last dance. Everyone knew it was ending. Phil Jackson's contract was up, the front office wanted to break the team apart, Pippen was unhappy and injured to start the year, Rodman was Rodman. The whole season had the feeling of a farewell that everyone could see coming, so the only question was whether they could pull off one more. Jordan, at 34, won the regular season MVP again, his 5th, settling the Malone score. He won his 10th scoring title, which remains the record. He won the All-Star Game MVP. Even at the very end, even as the body slowed, the production did not, and it came down to the Utah Jazz again, in the finals again. Game 6, the Bulls a win away from a 6th title, the Jazz with a late lead, and then the sequence that became the most replayed 45 seconds in basketball history. Jordan scores to cut it close, then he strips Karl Malone clean on the other end, the defensive play people forget because of what came next. He brings it up, fewer than 10 seconds left, the cross, the little nudge to create space. And yes, there's a debate about that nudge to this day, whether it was a push-off that should have been called, and we'll let both sides have it, because honest is the whole point of this film. And then the jump shot, the follow-through held in the air, nothing but net. That was the last shot Michael Jordan ever took as a Chicago Bull, a championship winner, on the road, to close out a 6th title. He held that pose, and that's the freeze frame that ended an era. 6th ring, 6th finals MVP, 6 trips to the finals, 6 champions. He never once let a finals get to a winner-take-all game. Every time he reached the mountaintop, he closed it out, and then he walked away again. The team was dismantled. Phil left, Pippen left. The dynasty was over by design, broken up at its peak, rather than allowed to decline. It should have ended there. The perfect ending, the last shot, the held pose, the 6th ring. But it didn't end there, because 3 years later, Michael Jordan did the one thing the legend tells you he never should have done. He came back one more time, older, heavier, on a broken down body, for a bad team. And as strange as those final years were, they're not a footnote we can skip. They're the last piece of evidence, the one that tells us where the floor of his ability actually was. So that's where we go next. Just how good was Michael Jordan, really? Here's the part of the story almost everyone wants to pretend didn't happen. The Washington Wizards years. The 2 seasons that don't make the highlight reels, that get left off the trophy case, that even Jordan loyalists wave away with an embarrassed, well, we don't count those. We're going to count them. Because if this whole film is about evidence, then the Wizards years are the most honest evidence we have. The championship seasons show you the ceiling. These 2 seasons show you the floor, what was left of Michael Jordan when nearly everything that made him Michael Jordan had been taken away by time. Set the stage. After his 2nd retirement, Jordan moved into the front office. He'd become a part owner and the head of basketball operations for the Washington Wizards, a bad team, a losing franchise, a long way from the dynasty, and he couldn't stand watching from a suit. So in 2001, at 38 years old, he gave up his ownership stake and put the jersey back on, for a franchise that wasn't going anywhere. In his first season back, on a bad team at 38, with a knee that would eventually shut him down, he averaged better than 22 points a game. The next year, at 40 years old, he played all 82 games, every single one. A 40-year-old man, the oldest meaningful scorer in the league, refusing to sit a single night, and he averaged 20 a game. He became the first player ever, at 40 years old, to score 40 points in a game. He dropped 43 on the New Jersey Nets. At 40, 2/3 of the players he was scoring on weren't born when he won his first scoring title. Now, let's be clear-eyed, because that's the deal we made. These teams were not good. The Wizards missed the playoffs both years. This was not vintage Jordan. The explosion was gone. The lift was gone. He was scoring on craft and footwork and sheer will instead of flight. And the way it ended was ugly. After he retired for good, the franchise pushed him out of the front office, an unceremonious exit for a man who'd given them 2 years of his body. But flip it around. The floor of Michael Jordan's ability, the absolute worst, oldest, most broken down version, was a 20 points a night scorer who could still drop 40 at age 40 and would not take a night off. Most players never reach that as their ceiling. That was his basement. His final game was in April of 2003 in Philadelphia. They subbed him out late. An opposing arena stood and gave him a roaring ovation that went on and on. He sat back down for one more stretch because the crowd demanded it. That's how it ended. Not with a 6th ring and a held pose, but with a rival city refusing to let him leave the floor. So that's the whole career. Every season, rookie to 40. Now we stop telling the story and we render the verdict. And to do that honestly, we have to put the 4 big arguments on the table, the 4 lenses we've been carrying this whole time, and actually settle them. The era. This is the skeptic's strongest modern weapon, so we give it real weight. The argument goes, Jordan played in a weaker, slower, less skilled league, fewer truly great athletes, no three-point revolution, less sophisticated training and analytics, easier competition, and some of that is fair. The talent pool today is deeper and more global. The skill level, top to bottom, is higher, and pretending otherwise is just homerism. But here's the other half, and the skeptics never give it equal time. Jordan played in an era that was physically allowed to do things to him that are flatly illegal now. Defenders could hand check, keep a forearm on a ball handler the entire possession, ride him, reroute him, grab and bump him on every drive. That rule was changed, in large part because of how teams used it to maul players like Jordan. There was no defensive 3-second rule for most of his career, which meant a center could camp in the paint and wall off the rim all night. Hard fouls weren't ejections, they were strategy. The entire Pistons dynasty was built on the legality of putting Jordan on the floor. So which era was harder to score 30+ a night in? An era where the rules were rewritten specifically to make scoring easier, or the one Jordan played in, where they let defenders hit you? The honest answer is that the era argument cuts both ways, hard, and anyone who only mentions the half that helps their case is selling you something. Lens 2, the advanced stats. This is where the analytics community, which loves to dethrone old legends, runs into a wall. Career scoring average, 30.1 a game, the highest in the history of the league. Not for a season, for an entire career. And it climbs in the playoffs when the lights are brightest and the defense is tightest to 33 a game. Also the highest in NBA history. He scored more in the postseason than the regular season, which is the exact opposite of what happens to most stars. Player efficiency rating, the catch-all metric for per-minute production. Jordan's career mark is the highest the league has ever recorded. Win shares, total games worth of wins added, among the very top in history. He is not a player whose legend survives despite the analytics. He's a player whose legend is confirmed by them. Numbers that were supposed to humble the old gods bow to him. And then the resume, which is just math of a different kind. 5 MVPs, 10 scoring titles, the record, 6 finals, 6 champions, 6 finals MVPs. He was named the best player in every single finals he ever played. Defensive Player of the Year, 9 times first team all defense. The two-way completeness is right there on the trophy shelf. Lens 3, the supporting cast, the Pippen carried him argument. And this is the one place we have to give the skeptics a real earned point, not a grudging one, a real one. Michael Jordan had elite help. Scottie Pippen is a top 50 player of all time, an all-NBA two-way star who, as we saw, led a Jordan-less team to 55 wins. Phil Jackson is the most successful coach in NBA history. Dennis Rodman is one of the greatest rebounders and defenders ever. The triangle offense was a genuinely great system run by a genuinely great staff. Anyone who tells you Jordan did it alone is lying to you. He did not do it alone. Nobody does. But here's where the argument breaks, and it breaks on the evidence we already gathered. Remember the natural experiment. Take Jordan off that exact roster. Same Pippen, same system, same coach, and they win 55 and lose in the second round. Put him back, and they win 72 and never lose a final. The cast was good enough to be very good. It took Jordan to make them immortal. The help was real. The gap between very good and greatest ever, that gap was him. Lens 4, the counterfactuals, the what-ifs. And these are the ones that, if anything, make the case stronger. What if he never played baseball? He left at the peak of a three-peat and came back to win another three-peat. The 18 months in the middle is the only thing standing between Michael Jordan and the possibility of 8 straight championships. The gap in his ring count isn't a failure. It's a self-inflicted intermission. What if not for the Pistons' wall? Those 3 years of being physically broken by Detroit might have cost him titles, but they're also what forged him. Take away the wall and maybe you get more rings, but you might not get the relentless, reconstructed killer who came out the other side. And the cleanest one, the number that ends every argument. He never played a Game 7 in the finals. 6 times he reached the final series of the season, and 6 times he closed it out before it could come down to a single winner-take-all night. He didn't survive the finals, he dictated them. So the verdict. Let's go back to where we started. I told you at the very beginning that you already think you know the answer, and that there's a difference between a legend you accept and a case you can defend. We've now spent hours building the case from the ground up, and we've handed the skeptics the mic at every turn. So here's the honest finding, caveats included, because a verdict without caveats is just a slogan. Where the skeptics are right, the early years really were empty in the win column. For 6 seasons, he was the best scorer alive and won nothing. And that's a real part of the record, not a smudge to wipe off. He had historically great help, and the dynasty was a team achievement as much as an individual one. And comparing eras is genuinely, maybe permanently, impossible to do cleanly. Anyone who gives you a tidy answer is overconfident. But here is what survives contact with all of it. A player who scored more efficiently, on higher volume, against more physical defenses than the modern game allowed. Who at his peak was the best offensive player and one of the best defensive players in the league at the same time. The only perimeter player ever to be named both most valuable and defensive player of the year in a single season. Who scored more in the playoffs than the regular season when it was hardest. Whose advanced metrics, the very tools built to topple old legends, place him at the top. Who took a franchise from a graveyard to 72 wins. Who went 6 for 6 in the finals and was the best man on the floor every time. Whose floor, at 40, on a broken body, was still 20 points a night. And who, when you ran the one experiment that actually matters, remove him and watch what's left, was the exact measurable difference between a very good team and an immortal one. The honest answer isn't the one you were handed. It's better than that, because now you've earned it. He is not the unquestioned flawless deity of the highlight reels. He's something more interesting and more durable. The most complete, most ruthless, most rigorously provable case for the greatest basketball player who ever lived. A case that gets stronger, not weaker, the harder you push on it. The legend was handed to you. The evidence you now own. And that's the difference between knowing something and being told it. I'm curious where you land after all of that, because the best part of this question is that it's still a question. Drop your verdict in the comments. Tell me which lens moved you and which one you think I gave too much credit. That's the conversation. This has been Game is Culture.